The stewards are going to distribute Bibles. If you'd like to follow me in what I'm going to share this morning, then when you have a Bible, please turn to Psalm 121. Anybody hot? A little bit stuffy? If you've got a bit of paper or something in your hand, just do that vigorously for a few moments. It'll get a bit of air circulating around the room. It does actually help. Thank you very much. Some of you don't believe me, but it does make a difference. Those of you that are eagle-eyed will notice that I've now got a different shirt and tie on from the beginning of this service. Anybody notice that? Did anybody notice that? About 4 of you. Great. That's because we are serving pancakes after each service, and I decided that it was my pastoral responsibility to taste actually they were waffles and ice cream with bananas and maple syrup, just to make sure that nobody was going to get food poisoning or anything else. So I did that, enjoyed them immensely, and was standing down there about to enter into the second service and noticed a huge stain right here. And I thought, oh, I'm going to have to go and change. So nothing to do with the sermon, I just thought you might be interested. Can we also welcome Bethany Anderson, who's back to see us from Texas? And I've been in touch with several pastors in Dallas, offering our prayers of love and support for that city as you come to terms with all that's been happening there. Liberty, equality, brotherhood. These are the cries that sit at the heart of French democracy. Yet in some ways, they could be replaced by the words fear, uncertainty, and suspicion as the main watchwords of what is happening in democracies around the world today. On the 7th of January 2015, 20 people were killed when the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo was attacked by Islamic terrorists. On the 13th of November of the same year, in the Bataclan Theatre and in bars and the sports stadium in Paris, 130 people were killed, as once again Islamic terrorism and fundamentalism wrought havoc. And then on the 14th of July, just a few days ago, we will all have watched with horror as 84 people were killed on the street of Nice and the Promenade des Anglais. And 52 people's lives are now hanging in the balance. That vehicle ramming wasn't the first that had happened in France. There was one on the 21st of December 2014 in Dijon. And there was one the following day on the 22nd of December in Nantes. And then on the 1st of January this year in Valence, there was a third. Many of you will also have watched with horror 250 people killed in Baghdad on a bombing on the 6th of July. These are terrible attacks wrought by religious fundamentalists with a wrong idea of God and a wrong idea of right and wrong. Islamic fundamentalism is, I believe, the greatest threat to peace in the world in our generation. It has spread a spectre of fear and terror, not only over France, but over the rest of the world. And it really began in the minds of the public anyway, on the 11th of September 2001, with 4 coordinated terror attacks in New York and in Washington and in the Pentagon, when passenger jets were aimed at 4 different buildings. 3 of them were hit. 3,000 people were killed and 6,000 people were injured. So began the war on terror, which George W. Bush described as a fight against the axis of evil, in my view, extremely unhelpful words that did not bring peace. Tony Blair joined him in that fight. And on 9/11, he said this, the same day as the Twin Towers fell: "This mass terrorism is the new evil in our world today. It is perpetrated by fanatics who are utterly indifferent to the sanctity of human life. And we, the democracies of this world, are going to have to come together and fight it together." Then on the Friday night of this week, we saw an attempted coup in Turkey. And everywhere around us, there seems to be uncertainty. Douglas Adams, the author of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, once said, "We demand rigidly defined areas of doubt and uncertainty. We can cope with it so long as it doesn't affect everything. We like to box it in." But the reality is, for many of us, if we stop and think, whether it's race-incited hatred and attacks in America, or it is the uncertainty of all that I've just said, or British politics, or international affairs, or terrorism, or new definitions of right and wrong. Because so many people don't know what to do. Uncertainty is rife. I would hazard a guess that many people here are feeling uncertain. Uncertain about their children's futures or their grandchildren's futures. I think, in some ways, it is the inevitable result of us cutting free from the moorings of truth and trust and honesty. I think we can trace our journey back. Today isn't the day to do it. But we can trace our journey back into this uncertain world. To those moments in our history as a continent and around the world where we have decided that we know best. Where God and His truth and His revealed will has been put into second place behind our cleverness and our plans. Today isn't the day for me to explore that. But I do want to read something to you that speaks of the uncertainty that many people in the world feel today. It's by an American author called Ron Rash, who a number of years ago now wrote a book called One Foot in Eden. But nothing is solid and permanent. Our lives are raised on the shakiest of foundations. You don't need to read history books to know that. You only have to know the history of your own life, he said. I'll return to that later on, but that is the reality for most people today. Their lives are built on rocky foundations, uncertainties, not certainties, things that they're not sure about, concepts of truth and right and wrong that are as fluid as water. And when that happens, uncertainty is a natural consequence. It's an unavoidable impact when we decide that we know best. I think, as citizens in the United Kingdom, if we reflect on our own country's history over the last 10 or so years, we will begin to understand why uncertainty is rising and rising and rising in our heads and in our thoughts. Take the Chilcot Inquiry, announced on the 15th of June 2009 by Gordon Brown, published on the 6th of July 2016. A damning verdict on the decision to go to war, demonstrating a catalogue of catastrophic decisions and errors of judgment based on faulty information, wrong ideas, and predetermined decisions. And as a result, thousands of people were murdered. They lost their lives. It shakes authority for us when we see a Prime Minister finding it difficult to say, I got it wrong. It shakes our confidence in authority and in people around us. Add to that child abuse cases. Just last week, the terrible story of a Church of England home in Kent, where young girls had been systematically abused over a number of years. Or look at the cases highlighted by the Boston Globe in an inquiry known as the Spotlight Inquiry around Catholic priests who had been abusing children for many, many years, which demonstrated and flooded in around the world and has brought a really catastrophic impact on confidence in the church. Jimmy Savile's terrible activities, the BBC's lack of accountability, the way it reported Cliff Richard and jumped to conclusions that were wrong, the police and the way they dealt with Hillsborough, the cash for questions rows, the MP's expenses, lies on both sides of the Brexit campaign. Add all of those together and it doesn't take long before you realise no wonder we're uncertain. No wonder we don't trust authority. No wonder we are suspicious when people tell us things. That's what happens when a society repeatedly lies and calls the truth a lie and the lie a truth. That's the consequence that we have to live with. But is there, in the midst of all of that, fear, suspicion and uncertainty? The new triad to replace liberty, equality and brotherhood. Is there anything that we can rely on? Is there anything that we can trust? Is there anyone that we can trust? Proverbs chapter 29 verse 2 says, when the righteous govern, the just shall rejoice. So should we therefore simply pray that God puts Christians in governments around the country? I'm not sure about that. Without being any more controversial than I've already been, George W. Bush was a Christian. Tony Blair is a Christian. Just because somebody carries the label Christian doesn't mean that they're going to be good politicians. There's a whole load of furore around the recent Conservative Party leadership and the idea that Andrea Leadsom was victimised because she was a Christian. Take that to one side for the moment. It's not the subject of my sermon this morning. Would she have made a good Prime Minister? There are questions that we don't simply answer with, if they're a Christian, they'll be good. You see, the determination that we have to make is whether somebody who uses the name Christian is actually demonstrating the roots of the word Christian. Because there is someone who can be trusted, who will never fail us, who will never let us down, who in the midst of all the uncertainties that you might be feeling now for your family, for this nation, for the world, that the people in France might be feeling, there is someone who can be trusted. God can be trusted. Psalm 46, verses 1 to 3, read this way: God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth should change, though the mountains shake in the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble with its tumult. God is the ultimate trustworthy authority. Those who trust him and act according to his plans and his instructions, and those who show him to us clearly, are also trustworthy. Not simply because they use the word Christian, but because they demonstrate God's values. That's why Jackie Pullinger is trustworthy. That's why John Stott was trustworthy. It's why Billy Graham has been trustworthy. It's why a whole range of people, it's why a whole range of people here in our church family have been trustworthy. Why Madge Beattie was trustworthy. Why Fred was trustworthy. Why Frank Faddeep was trustworthy. Why Jim Graham was trustworthy. Because they demonstrated a belief about who God was that evidenced itself in the priorities that they set and the decisions that they made. So when we are looking for trustworthiness, we are looking for God. It is always God that we are looking for when we are looking for trustworthiness. We respond to God's work in people when we see evidence of him. When we see his behaviors in others, his values in others, it is that acts like a magnet to us. And it's what our country needs more than it has ever needed. It's what the world needs more than it has ever needed. God is reliable, dependable, strong. Let me give you some of the core values that I think sit at the heart of an authority that we can trust. Commitment. We will trust someone or something when we know that that person or that group is interested in others and will put what is right above what is expedient. Understanding. We'll trust someone or something when we know that they understand what we are facing. They've listened to what we are going through. They are not just observing, they understand us. We will trust someone or something when we understand that not only do they have an understanding of our situation, but they have the power to change it. What is the good in being completely empathetic but powerless in changing a situation? I understand, but I can do nothing about it is not what we need. I understand and I can do something about it is what we need as individuals, what our families need, and what our nation needs. We don't need weak politics. We don't need people with ideas but no power. And we don't need people with power but no empathy. We need people who are committed, who understand what we are going through and have the power to change the situation and the wisdom to know what to do. That are not going to fire off half-cocked, but are going to be wise. And we need people that are going to have the commitment and the presence to stay with us through thick and thin. One of the reasons this fellowship has been so beautifully impacted by Jim Graham's ministry and by his death is because he became part of the furniture. Because he was here for 50 years. With that type of longevity, there is something that happens in a community's life. And we should celebrate it and thank God for it. Let me summarize those things: commitment, understanding, power, wisdom, and presence in a different way. We will trust someone if they have power, perception, presence, and promise. If they have the power to change what we're facing. If they have the presence to be with us in it. If they have perception to know what to do. And if they are faithful to their promises. I can think of no one who fulfills those criteria more than God himself. No one who does it better. In the book of Psalms, there's nestled 14 or 15 songs, from Psalm 120 to Psalm 134. They're called the Psalms of Ascent, or the Songs of Ascent. They were sung by Jewish people as they made their way to the three main religious festivals in Jerusalem once a year. As they sang them together. They were probably being sung when Jesus entered Jerusalem to be crucified. And they would sing them because it would be a reminder to them of the faithfulness of God and the power of God and the presence of God. Here were a group of people uncertain about the future, scattered in diaspora across the world, who returned 3 times a year to their spiritual home in order to remind themselves of who they were and what God was like for them. And when you read the first lines of those Psalms, you begin to hear the power of this God at the center conviction that gives you certainty in the midst of uncertainty. In Psalm 120, you hear the cry of distress as they call out to God on their way. In my distress, I cry to the Lord that he may answer me. In Psalm 121, the yearning and searching of, I will lift my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? The relief of Psalm 122. I was glad when they said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. The trust of Psalm 123. To you I lift up my eyes. The hope and the trust of Psalm 124, a declaration, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side, then when our enemies attacked us, we would have been swallowed up alive. The invitation of Psalm 125, those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be moved, but abides forever. The celebration of Psalm 126, when the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dreamed. The dependence of Psalm 127, unless the Lord builds the house. The experience of Psalm 128, happy is the one who trusts in the Lord. The desperation and honesty of Psalm 129 and 130. Often they have attacked me from my youth, Lord. Out of the depths I cry to you. The honesty of Psalm 131. My heart is not lifted up. My eyes are not raised too high. I do not occupy myself with thoughts that are too lofty for me. The recollection of Psalm 132. I remember, and O Lord, remember in David's favor all the hardships that he endured. The singleness of purpose of Psalm 133 around unity, and the collective experience of Psalm 134. Come, bless the Lord, all you servants of the Lord, who stand by night in the presence of the Lord. Lift up your hands to the holy place and bless the Lord. May the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth, bless you from Zion. But it is to Psalm 121 that I want to return and ask you to read it slowly and deliberately with me, reflecting on those things: power, perception, presence, and promise. In this psalm, can you hear the power of God? In this psalm, can you understand his wisdom, his knowledge, his ability, and his perception? In this psalm, do you see his presence evidenced? And what are the promises that you can hear him make to you and to me and to the people of God as you read these words slowly? I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where will my help come? My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. He will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. He who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. The Lord will keep you. You're going out and you're coming in from this time on and forevermore. Has there ever been a more powerful expression of faith, of faithfulness, than the expression that God gives us? Is there anyone, anywhere, who is more reliable than him? This is the God who has all power. In old theology, there are 3 words that describe power, perception, and presence. They all begin with the same phrase. I want to add a 4th, but they are omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence. They simply mean that God is all-powerful, God is all-knowing, and God is all-present. To that, let me add a 4th phrase. God is omni-faithful. He is faithful to all of his promises all of his people, all of the time. That's what trustworthiness looks like. How does this psalm help us understand that? I lift my eyes from the hills to the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. If he is the one who made all things, then we can trust him with all things. He is the one who is present with us at the first breath that we take and at the last moment that we expire. He is there at our going out and our coming in. He is always present with us. He knows everything about us. One of the great plights of evangelicals, I think, particularly, but Christians as more generally, is this. We use language about our addressing to God that makes it sound as if we never question him. We're almost afraid that if we question him, we're somewhere in the wrong. I've had people say to me on occasion, I have never questioned the existence of God. I've never had a single doubt. I've never had a single moment when I've ever doubted anything that God has ever said to me. I scratch my head. And I think, do you know what? I think either you are so perfect that you're ready for heaven, or there's something wrong with the way you're thinking. I'm not suggesting that doubt is something you should all rush out to find, but it's a natural part of faith. Where was God on Bastille Day? Am I the only person that asks questions like that? Because he clearly could have stopped the man getting in the truck. When you read stories of parents throwing their children over fences in the hope that the child is going to be all right, you have to be inhuman for that not to do something to you. So we have a choice in those situations. Do we say that God isn't real? Or do we have to think long and hard about the God that we serve and what he is like? Many people decide he's not real, because they've not been taught how to think. They've not been taught how to question. They've not been taught how to wrestle. And they've not been taught how to be honest. God is big enough to deal with our questions. He's big enough to deal with our uncertainties. And he's strong enough to deal with our weaknesses and frailties. We don't need to be afraid. He knows what you're thinking anyway. He knows the questions that you have. He knows the doubts. He knows the anxieties. He knows the times that you've woken up in the night wondering, why did you let this happen? It doesn't take him by surprise. He is omniscient. Where was he on Bastille Day? As hard as it is for us to accept, he was in the truck. And he was on the road. And he was beside each person who breathed their last. And he was in the hospital with those that were fighting for their lives and still are. And he was in the room that man chose to sleep in the night before he got into the truck. And because he's a God that has given us choices, we live with the consequences of those choices. But don't ever think that that means that he's not powerful or not strong or not able. God is all powerful. And one of the things that he has done in his wisdom and in his grace has given us choices and the ability to make choices, even when those choices are catastrophic. Even when they leave us scratching our heads and wondering why the world and life ended up as it is, it doesn't mean that God is faithless. But that's not the point that I want to make with you at the moment. I want to make a different point. We can all answer the question, theologically, why does God permit things? All of you are more than capable of answering those questions. But that's not the point. The point that I'm trying to convey to you is, in his omnipotence and in his omniscience and in his omnipresence, his answer to suffering is not to explain it, it is to enter it, which is what we just remembered. The songs that we sang, the bread that you held in your hand, the wine that you drank, is a reminder that God doesn't explain it, he endures it. He carries it. He feels it. He knows it, not as an observer, but as a participator. A couple of months ago, I was in my study preparing to come out here one Sunday morning to preach a sermon in a very difficult time for me. And I looked up, and those of you that have been in my study will realize that there are several thousand books in it. Ask Marie Karshagen if you want, because she categorizes them for me, and it drives her mad. And a few months before that, I had bought a new prayer stool. I should have got it. Maybe somebody could go and get it for me and bring it out and let people see it. Is that okay? I'll let you see it in a minute. I bought this new prayer stool. You might need my keys. Thanks, Joyce. And I was looking around my office. I was looking at all these books, and I was looking at some of the titles of them. The Problem with Evil, Truth and Consequences in an Evil World, Learning to Do the Right Thing, Where is God When Life is Hurting, Disappointment with God, What's So Amazing About Grace, and the Greek New Testament commentary on 1 Thessalonians, a Hebrew Bible. Looking at all of these titles, and I could see them, books that for me had become part of my journey. I know the smell of them. If I want to find where something is, I can see in my head, I've got an odd memory, where a paragraph is in one of those books. I've read of the 4,000 or so books that are actual physical books, I've read about 95% of them. And I find myself on this morning working out what to preach and how to pray and what to say. I spend as much time crafting prayers for sermons as I do crafting my preaching. And I look to God, and on my knees, I say to him, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to preach. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I have the faith or the courage or the confidence to do what you want me to do. And all around me I can see these books, and I'm thinking, and all the knowledge that I've gained over all the years from reading all of these books doesn't help me at this moment. Thank you so much, Chris. You look remarkably unlike Joyce. Here's my little prayer stool. So I get on my knees. I'll let you see it first. I bought this from a couple in Rickmansworth. Look at it. Can you see it? Look at how worn that is. Somebody's kneeled on that for years and years and years. It's worn down by someone who day after day, week after week, and month after month got on their knees. You can see in the top here, if you look at this, there's a patination here. There's a patination here and here. That's from somebody gripping this, like that. It's covered in stains. They're stains that have been gathered from dozens and dozens of years of weeping. Not mine, somebody else's. So I find myself, this is one of my most treasured possessions. Every day, this is where I kneel when I pray for you. This is the old bit of wood that I get on my knees with an address book open of our church family. Every one of you that is part of this church family. And I go through it day by day and weep for you. And I find myself holding on to this on this particular morning. And here's what I say to God. All the reading, all the studying, everything that I've done will not carry me through. The only thing that will carry me through is if you are with me. The fact that you made a promise and you don't break it. And I'm holding on to the promise. The promise that you're there. The promise that you understand. The promise that you know. The promise that you're faithful. All the studying and the reading is important. It matters. It shaped me and will continue to shape me and form me. But actually it doesn't amount to a row of beans if your theological conviction is not matched by the ability in your heart to say, and even if I don't know how to, I will trust you in this moment. You don't have to understand God to trust him. You don't have to be able to explain him to trust him. You just have to be able to put your hand out and say, help me. And in the midst of uncertainty, he is utterly reliable. He is utterly dependable. He is utterly trustworthy. Why? Because underneath all of that are these theological foundations. He is all-powerful, all-knowing, all-seeing, and always faithful. Doctrine and theology are not dead ideas. They keep you alive when feelings have gone out the window. They hold you in the palm of God's mighty hand when you want to get out of it. When you think, I can't take any more, the doctrine that you've been taught will keep you there. That God is faithful. God is strong. God knows. And God is there. And you can see it nowhere more clearly than in Jesus Christ. If you want to know how loving he is, look at Jesus' love for people. If you want to know how faithful he is, look at how much Jesus was willing to endure for you and for me and for the world. If you want to know the extent of his forgiveness, hear him on the cross say, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. If you want to know how committed he is to you, hear him praying in John 17. Finish the work in them. Bring them to the place where my glory can be seen. Sometimes we can turn our theology into something which is so complicated, so long, and so lifeless. And yet it isn't that. When Jesus was walking on the water to Peter and Peter was drowning, I don't think Peter worked out a theological construct of how to get on the water. I think he just got on the water. And as he started to sink, I don't think he had time to work out a Trinitarian response to a crisis moment in theological conviction. I think what he did as he was drowning was shout, Lord, save me! And Jesus lifted his hand out and saved him. I think the disciples in Luke 17, when they said, increase our faith, were praying a desperate prayer. I think when the man whose son had been sick in Mark chapter 9 said, Lord, I do believe, help my unbelief. He was doing a natural thing. He was saying, I'm trusting you as much as I can. Help me to trust you more. Whoever wrote Psalm 109, when they said, help me, Lord, was articulating a theology which is so important and so deep that we need to remember it. And God hears those prayers from us today. You might not have been made to feel uncertain by Brexit or by Nice. You might not have been made to feel uncertain by race riots in America or by political change or by leaders that make a decision and then leave us to live with the consequences. But you might have been made to feel uncertain by a family member who's rejecting you, by a health situation that won't go away, by a worry about paying the mortgage at the end of the month, by a marriage that has gone pear-shaped, by saying goodbye to someone that you loved. Or maybe you've been made to feel uncertain because the man that led this church for 26 years is gone. I don't really know why you might feel uncertain, but here's the reality. If you place your trust in God, he deals with that uncertainty itself. Jesus, when he taught in the Sermon on the Mount, talked about choosing to build your house on rock or on sand. So let me go back to that quote that I used earlier on from Ron Rash. Nothing is solid and permanent. Our lives are raised on the shakiest foundations. You don't need to read the history books to know that. You only have to know the history of your own life. Well, Ron, you're wrong. You can build your life on something permanent. You can build your life and your convictions on something that doesn't shake. It is possible to have a core reality to your life that nothing can sway. That reality is Jesus Christ. And when everything goes wrong, he remains the same. So Ron's novel is wrong. That point is wrong. And my question is, what are you building your life on? There's an American pastor called Mark Batterson. He's from Washington, and he's a great writer. Really great writer. He's written a brilliant book about prayer called The Circle Maker, if you get a chance to read it. It's brilliant. But I discovered that he'd written a book on a text that I have never heard anybody else preach on except me. That sounds arrogant. I didn't mean it to sound as arrogant as it sounded. The text is about a man called Benaiah. And here's the text. Benaiah was a man who slew a lion in a pit on a snowy day. How do you get a sermon out of that? Benaiah was a man who slew a lion in a pit on a snowy day. The sermon that I preached, and his book is much better than my sermon, just so that we're clear. I've preached on it a couple of times, is this. You're walking along and you fall into a pit. And you think, couldn't get much worse. And you hear a noise. And there's a lion looking over at you and you think, well, at least he's not in the pit. And then he jumps in. And then you think, well, it can't get much. I'm now stuck in a pit with a lion. At least it's not snowing. And then it starts to snow. How do you get out of a pit that is filling with snow with a lion that's threatening your life, with sides that are running and you can't hold on to? Nothing could get worse. And yet this man's described as Benaiah, the man who slew the lion in the pit on a snowy day. Why? Because sometimes so much uncertainty means that the only thing you can do is face your fear. Face your lion. Stare it in the face and kill it. That's what Mark's book's about. It's what my sermon was about too, by the way. But in the book, here's something that he says. Remember, I'm talking to you about uncertainty today. Embrace relational uncertainty. It's called romance. Embrace spiritual uncertainty. It's called mystery. Embrace occupational uncertainty. It's called destiny. Embrace emotional uncertainty. It's called joy. Embrace intellectual uncertainty. It's called revelation. And in the end, you see, the very thing that we fear, uncertainty, is a gift. Because if we will allow it to do its work in us, it will produce in us faith and trust and joy and revelation and excitement and passion and possibility. So long as our lives are built on something certain, we can face uncertainty straight in the eye and we can kill the lion. And we can discover new things. We can enter into new things. A marriage isn't over because of one mistake. A church isn't over because of one wrong judgment. A financial future isn't destroyed because of one decision. There's always the opportunity to do something else. There's always the opportunity to embrace a new moment. And if we can do that, then our lives can be utterly transformed. One of my favorite hymns as I close is by Walter Chalmers Smith. It was written in 1839. You'll know it as soon as you hear me starting it. Immortal, invisible, God only wise, in light inaccessible hid from our eyes. Most blessed, most glorious, the Ancient of Days. Almighty, victorious, thy great name we praise. Unresting, unhasting, and silent as light, nor wanting, nor wasting, thou rulest in might. Thy justice like mountains high, soaring above, thy clouds which are fountains of goodness and love. Through all life thou givest, to both great and small. In all life thou livest, the true life of all. We blossom and flourish as leaves on the tree, and wither and perish, but naught changeth thee. Great Father of glory, pure Father of light, thine angels adore thee, all veiling their sight. But of all thy rich graces, this grace, Lord, impart. Take the veil from our faces, the veil from our heart. All loud we would render, O help us to see, 'tis only the splendor of light hideth thee. And so let thy glory, Almighty, impart through Christ and his story, thy Christ, to the heart. May God enable you in the midst of uncertainty to embrace the certainty of who he is. Please stand with me if you're able, and we'll pray, and then we will sing together. This is a prayer based on a prayer by the theologian Albert Schweitzer, which I thought would be appropriate for today, amended by me. My Lord God, I have no idea where I am going. I do not see the road ahead of me, and I cannot know for certain where it will end. Nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think I am following your will does not mean that I am actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you does, in fact, please you. And I hope I have that desire in all that I am doing. I hope that I will never do anything apart from that desire. And I know that if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, though I may not know anything about it. Therefore, I will trust you always, though I may seem to be lost and in the shadow of death. I will not fear, for you are ever with me, and you will never leave me to face my trials alone. Amen.